Over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
So, the Barbarusa, we say pig, but like we see with a lot of these pig species, they do vary in what they look like compared to what we think in a domestic pig.
What can they teach us?
Another popular story, but definitely not true, is that a Barbarusa will use its tusks to hang from a tree to wait until a female Barbarusa comes trotting by.
Many species are in crisis and need your help. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
Welcome to All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
This will be a fun one. This is going to be a fun podcast. A lot of fun facts today.
Yes, we're talking about the pig deer, or the Barbarusa. It's a super fun species in the pig family, and it just has these very dramatic curved tusks, which Chris and I are going to dork out about today because they're really fascinating from an evolutionary perspective and from a physiological perspective too, as far as how they do what they do. And I was lucky enough to see Barbarusa this past weekend when I was at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and just being up and close and watching them root around and move around. They're a beautiful pig. I'm a huge lover of pigs. I got to work with them a lot at the zoo when I was a zookeeper, mama pigs and piglets. And it's always fun on the podcast when we get to talk about a pig family member. So, and it's been a while, right?
Oh, a long while. We did episode 145 warthog, but we're going to find out there's only 17 species of pigs. So, but there's a few more that we want to do. You know, when back in the day when I was working with your husband John with the Visayan warty pig, right, that they had there, we were doing some behavior studies.
Yeah, at the Santa Fe College Teaching Zoo.
Yeah,
they're really fun. They're busy. Those boys are always doing something in their exhibits, and they're very endangered as well. They're another Asiatic species of pig that's in peril. So
yeah. I was saying, you've been wanting to do this for a while because you've been saying we need to do them. These are endangered,
yes,
and they are very special. There is a lot of interesting physiology with these pigs.
Well, and their evolution too. I mean, how'd they get on the islands? And so we're going to talk about if they're good swimmers. We're going to talk about how big their tusks are. They have some really fun behaviors, from nesting to boxing.
Yes. Yeah.
But there's also a lot of cool facts that set them apart from other species of pigs that we know and love. So yeah, I had a great week prepping for this podcast. I got to see them. I took some videos of them that we'll share on Instagram. So Barbarusa, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's always fun when we do a podcast and you go and see the animal, or like you got to see him before we recorded. I always get excited. I'm like, oh yeah, we just covered that and all the behaviors and da-da-da-da-da. It's just fun. I have an amazing factoid that when we get to evolution that will blow people away. It's so fun. It just, every corner I went around with this species, I just was smiling and I couldn't wait to talk about it. So we're going to get going here in a second. Just really quick, thank you to our Patreon supporters. Angie and I are doing our monthly lives now. So for a cup of coffee a month, you know, you're supporting us, and we're supporting every organization we cover. In the past, we were doing one organization a month we sent money to, but now Angie and I are sending money to every organization we cover, because we talked about it. We really believe in what these people are doing out there around the world, on every continent, out in the oceans. So we're just sending what we can, thanks to your donations on Patreon. So thank you very much for that. Join us and look forward to our next live, where you can come on and talk to Angie and I and give us ideas on species. Just last week, you know, our good friend Chantel told us to cover the bandicoot, which we did. So you can have your say on the future of where we go with the podcast. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I want to give a huge shout out to Mermaid91 and iRose20, who wrote wonderful reviews for us on iTunes. I really appreciate it, and it keeps Chris and I going. So if you haven't already, which I'm sure many of you haven't, just take a few minutes, go on iTunes, click 5-star review and a few kind words to let us know that you're enjoying the podcast, and you can even recommend some species for Chris and I to cover. We definitely take it into consideration when we're prepping each month.
Yep. Well, so the Barbarusa, we say pig, but like we see with a lot of these pig species, they do vary in what they look like compared to what we think in a domestic pig.
Definitely, Chris. I mean, the Barbarossa does have that rounded body, that barrel-shaped belly that we're used to seeing in our domestic pigs. And they do have a pointed snout, but I think it's longer, much longer than our domestic pigs. And then they have long, thin legs compared to domestic pigs as well.
Mm-hmm.
And in some places, they were even considering them like deer legs, which I think they're not that thin and agile like deer legs, but they are more long and thin as compared to a domestic pig or like the Visayan warty hog. Now, their color is going to depend on what species, and we're going to talk all about that when we get into taxonomy because it was fun. They used to think they were subspecies, but now they're pretty certain that there are actually different species of Barbarossa on the different islands in Indonesia. And so the most well-known species of Barbarossa is big, and its body color is is gray or brown olive in color, and it's naked, which means it doesn't have much body hair as compared to some of the other species of Barbarossa. Because some of the other species of Barbarossa, like the golden Barbarossa, do have more hair. They're not hairy, like really hairy, but they do have more hair, and it's a lighter color. I don't know if it's golden, but it's definitely, it can be golden or cream colored. And then other species can have more of a black coat with a little bit more hair. But the most well-known, the Babirusa celebinus, which is the one that I saw at Disney's Animal Kingdom this past weekend, that's one that you can't even see any hair. It looks pretty naked.
Yeah.
And the skin has like large folds or almost like wrinkles on it, which is definitely different than a domestic pig that have very taut skin. And then, of course, there's the tusks. They're definitely the most dramatic feature on the Babirusa. And what they are generically, because Chris and I will definitely talk more in depth about the tusks, but in general, it's the upper canines of the male that basically don't even enter the mouth cavity, but grow up vertically towards the top of the snout and then curve backwards basically into the forehead. And then the Barbarossa also has lower canines that grow upward as well, but they're not as dramatic. They're big, but they don't go into the forehead. And the really cool thing about these canines/tusks in the Barbarossa that are in the male is that they're the only mammal with vertically growing canine teeth. And they get long. So they can be anywhere from 30 centimeters plus, which is anywhere from 8 to 12 inches, or about the size of a banana when full grown. So it's super fascinating. And the females don't have the upper tusks. They will have the lower tusks, but not as dramatic. So really just distinct. Once you see one, you'll have to either go on our show notes or do a Google image because they're really fascinating, and they're much different than warthogs, which Chris and I covered a while ago, which of course do have these tusks, but not so dramatic and not going up through their nasal passage, basically into their own head. That's for sure.
It's crazy. It's so crazy looking. That's why it's like there's so many interesting facts about this species.
Yeah, we're gonna bust some myths too about these tusks, because there's been a lot of thoughts on why they are and what they do. Do they hang from these tusks from trees? Yeah. Even John asked me, he's like, well, you have to be careful because like they can grow into their heads. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about, does that really true. Happen? Is that true? What does the research show us? Yeah. So it's definitely gonna be fun when we get to the tusks, but very, very.
No, they look like elephant tusks, once they're grown, like out and curving. So yeah, it's really going to be a lot of fun talking about those when we get there. And the size of a Barbarossa, they're going to vary by species, but up, their body length up to 40 inches or 110 centimeters. And then their tail's like another 10 to 12 inches. So they're not massive.
It's not curly. They don't have a curly tail. They have a nice straight, medium-sized length tail.
Yeah, so they're not massive pigs. They're not huge, but, not tiny. At height at the shoulder up to 31 inches. So, getting upwards close to 3 feet or 80 centimeters. But they can weigh up to over 200 pounds or 100 kilograms.
Yeah, they're not a small pig.
Yeah. They're not little tiny things. They're pretty big. Now, where they live, Angie's already said that Indonesia on these islands, there is 4 main islands that they find them. Sulawesi, which just last week or the week before when we talked about new species, I remember they discovered a couple there. I first thought it was in Africa somewhere, but it's actually Indonesia. Then Sula, Buru, and then Togian, the 4 islands that they find the Babirusa, and nowhere else on Earth. That's where they're at.
Right. It's just such a unique creature living in a very special habitat on these islands. So a lot to celebrate today.
Yeah, and they're not deep forest living. Reading that they prefer in more open forest, but they want to be near rivers and lakes and near water where they can root around, I guess. But really in the swamps in the rainforests of this part of the world, but not dense forests like you would think some other pigs. Now, we're going to talk about their conservation today. I mean, around IUCN has them around 5,000 individuals left in the world. But there's a lot of reasons why to care about this particular species. There's some really interesting stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely, Chris. And then even to expand on that is because they've now declared these 3 or 4 different distinct species, the numbers are even less. Like the Toigan one, there's only about 1,000 of. So when you really break it down into different types of Barbarusas, they just need a lot of our attention from a population standpoint to care about them and to fight for them and to make sure they have their natural habitat. But from an ecosystem point of view, being members of the pig family, they are omnivores and they do a lot of rooting around. And so if you think about it, when they are digging around, they do a great job mixing and aerating the soil for all the different plant species that grow in the Indonesia tropical rainforest there. And from a human or economic perspective, the Barbarusa is very important symbolically and culturally to a lot of the Indonesian natives. They were historically hunted for food for a long time. They were sometimes even captured and tamed as well. And now it is illegal to hunt them because their numbers are so well. And we're gonna highlight a lot of what Indonesia is doing to help protect the Barbarusa because they do treasure them as their native wild pig, and they're so important to them. So they don't hunt them anymore, but there is some still illegal poaching, which is keeping their numbers down and they're not rebounding the way that they should be, even though they are in protected, well-established forests for the most part. And then, Chris, what was really interesting from a biomedical point of view, Barbarusas are thought to have some medical secrets that researchers really want to tap into because this upper tusk or canine goes up through the top of the skull, like where the nasal bone would be. It's really the only what they call percutaneous or passing through the skin via puncture of a canine that is in the animal kingdom. And so the researchers want to know about the epidermis lining this area where the canine comes through, basically like the top of the head.
Yeah.
And because of medical devices such as catheters and other things that are implanted into humans and they don't typically do well within the epidermis, they can reject them or become irritated. And so researchers just want to know, how do they do that? And I think it's really curious, and potentially if they could unlock the secrets of how the Barbarusa's upper canine does poke through the skull and into the skin in such a nice, organized fashion that it could be potentially helpful to new medical devices.
I read that, and then something in my brain went, okay, very, very cool. Like, wow. Yeah, I get it. But they said it was the only animal that did this. And I am going back to an episode that we did of another species.
I know, your scientist brain is the same as mine. And whenever anybody says like really dramatic language of like the only or the best or the biggest, I'm always like, I need to see the data on that.
Yeah,
or is that really the only one? Because I was thinking about narwhal.
Yep.
And because I feel like their canine, the goes through, right?
Yeah, it looks like it does. It goes through the front of their mouth. That was episode 64. I mean, we did that a long time ago, but such an amazing, amazing whale. That is if you have not heard that episode, go back, Narwhal. What they use that for, the whole science behind that. Yeah. So I thought that, but then I thought, okay, well, maybe this is the only species they could really study it in, because studying it with a narwhal is probably near impossible.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And well, maybe it has something to do too with the material of the tusk. We'll talk a lot about that. The tusk of the Barbarusa is a little bit more brittle, or maybe it's the location of how it goes through the skin, or where, because it is so much more ventral.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say this is definitely a skull that I not only looked up, but I put like 3 or 4 screenshots of Barbarusa skulls compared to warthog skulls. I did not do a narwhal skull. See, I got to do that on my slides to just understand the morphology a little bit better. And I'm not a skull expert by any stretch of the imagination, but to really get a visual on how they differ, and it's just really fascinating.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot to learn from the species, and again, there's only 5,000 left on these 4 islands, and then the ones that we do have an emergency reserve around zoos around the world that are out saving them. I totally went left field this week, Angie, and I'm sitting here. We've covered a lot of Southeast Asia lately, and we've talked a lot about palm oil and a lot of the things the animals are facing. So I thought this would be a good week to kind of talk about science a little bit different, because looking at the Barbarusa and their skulls got me thinking about like dinosaurs. And right now in the movie theaters, when we're recording this, Jurassic World's out, so it's all in everybody's mind, dinosaurs again and the fossils. So I just wanted to go down this rabbit hole, and I just talk about, how do fossils become fossils? Like, what do they tell us? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the one I haven't gone down before on this podcast. And I remember years ago, I took an online course for free on dinosaurs just because I was curious. I love learning.
You and your rockin' Saturday nights.
Yeah, this is pre All Creatures podcast. but I remember watching this, like, how did fossils become fossils? And it's very, very interesting. So I'm going to go through it quickly, because with evolution, fossils are telling us a lot, right? It gives us a lot of our natural history. So it's always a weekly topic. Now, I started off like, okay, body decomposition. How long does it take for a body to decompose? When an animal dies, what happens? So basically, really quickly, before anything can become a fossil, you get this decomposition where 3 hours post-mortem, you get rigor mortis. That's where all the muscles stiffen. Within 1 to 3 days, the internal organs decompose, the cells, because the cells are dead. So the cells start to liquefy. This is where the dead animal or whatever, it begins to smell really bad. But within 5 days, bodily fluids are leaking. I don't know if I have to go through all of this, but 10 days, it's liquefying, right? Everything's decomposing. Bacteria.
Yeah, I got a good visual. You're doing
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then about a month post-mortem, most bodies are just like sludge, right? But the skeleton is left behind, right? Because that takes the longest to decompose. Now, obviously, that's going to vary, with where you are in Florida. It's hot, humid, lots of bacteria. That's going to happen quickly. If you go into some of the dry deserts, it's going to take a lot longer. Now, bones last quite a while. Interestingly, in soil, okay, this is not fossilization. These are just bones. In acidic soil, bones can completely dissolve within 20 years of like a large animal. So if we took an elephant, buried them in acidic soil, within about 20 years, those bones will be gone. You'll never know what was there. In neutral pH soil, skeletons can last for hundreds of years. Skeletons can last quite a while buried, but not indefinitely, right? Not like a fossil. So that's completely different of fossils. That's finding bones in the soil. Even I know we've found mammoth bones and things in pits that are thousands of years old. So bones take quite a while out in the environment, but they will eventually get crushed, decompose, whatever. Fossils are completely different. They're not actual bone. So when we go see fossils of a dinosaur, that's not bone, that's minerals that had filled where the bones were. So there's different processes of fossilization. Over time, the most common method of fossilization is called permineralization or petrification. So after all the tissue decays, after a few months, right, it becomes that goo that goes away. All the soft stuff is gone. The bone's left behind. But the water or the minerals surrounding the bone, so that's usually like they get covered up or whatever, dissolve the bone and replace it with minerals. So you have this imprint of the bones. That's what is left behind with the fossil. So it's permineralization. So when I go and you look, I remember Sue the dinosaur came through Florida. That's in Chicago.
I know. I'm going to try to take the boys this summer.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited.
Yeah. Like she is one of the most complete T-Rex skeletons in existence. And those bones you're looking at aren't actual dinosaur bones. It's actual minerals left behind that seeped in and took over the bone. Now there's carbonization. That's a different type of fossilization. This is way more complex than I'm making it, but I did go and read a bunch of this stuff because I thought it was so cool. One that I think is really cool too, that we leave behind, is molds or casts. So dinosaur imprints in soils, we've uncovered those.
Sure. Footprints and stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember Colorado a few years ago when I was there near Red Rocks, there's a dinosaur walk, and they actually have dinosaur imprints because Colorado, they're coming up out of the soil. And so what that is the imprint in the soil, minerals come in and fill it behind and leaves a mold. So you have this mold of this animal that once walked there. So then, Angie, where all this comes with Jurassic World, where I kind of ran down a rabbit hole again, was the premise of Michael Crichton's book is they go in, they have a mosquito trapped in resin that had fed on a dinosaur. They drill into the resin and suck out the blood or the dino DNA from the mosquito that's trapped in the resin. All right. So that's the premise. Can that be done? What do you think?
Well, you need more than blood.
Well, what's in blood? I mean,
DNA.
Yeah. Is the DNA going to be preserved in that blood over millions of years?
No,
not at all. Not at all. Because DNA, what do you know? Well, you didn't do a lot of DNA. You were doing all the chemical stuff. You were doing all the crazy molecules.
Yeah, I was doing one step bigger than the nucleotides of DNA. But I mean, they're gonna break down over time.
DNA is very fragile, fragile, right? So DNA is not going to preserve well over millions of years. It's not. It's just especially with fossilization.
Even trapped in amber.
Even trapped in amber during that heating process, dehydration process. The scientists say there's no way DNA can survive that, because what they did find, I don't know if you saw this, is trapped in resin, they found dinosaur feathers about 99 million years ago. And I remember that made the news a few years back. Trapped in resin. Then what they found were ticks in there. So 99 million year old ticks that were engorged with blood. And they thought, oh, could we go in there and get DNA out of them? But no, you can't, because DNA does not preserve well. So the only other thing I found very, very interesting, and this was controversial, but science, this is why I love science, is now we're finding remnants of organic material in these fossils. And they're like, how in the heck is that even possible? Because logic would dictate organic material gets digested by bacteria, disappears. but there was a scientist about 15 years ago. She released a paper. She found dinosaur proteins. I think it was not duck-billed platypus, the duck-billed dinosaur. What was it? The what? Put you on the spot
again. My kids are going to be so disappointed, Chris. I'm disappointed in my own self. Hydrosaurs, Chris. I think hydrosaurs.
I think that's what it was. I read the paper. I think it was a duck. It was a duck, the duck-billed one. Mm-hmm. But she found these proteins in fossils, and people are like, okay, no, your lab was contaminated. There's no way.
There has to be another reason. Yeah.
No, independent laboratories have gone in and done it. And yes, they're finding biological material that is trapped in these fossils. And what they think happens is the iron and the protein becomes cross-linked. So the bacteria,
they bind together. Yeah.
Yeah. So the bacteria can't digest it. So it remains behind.
Interesting.
So I'll leave that door open. Even though we can't get DNA from a mosquito trapped in resin, we are finding proteins of dinosaurs in fossils. So we never know what we're going to be able to do in the next 50 to 100 years if Jurassic World can be possible or not. I don't think in my lifetime, but and maybe in someone else's lifetime that's young listening to this podcast, maybe there'll be some sort of dinosaur hybrid clone, genetically engineered, running around at somewhere.
That would be so fascinating. As much as I would love that, I'm still like, let's save the species we have. Like
exactly.
The Barbarusa.
Yes, the Barbarusa. Okay, so anyways, that was a totally
I loved
tangent,
it. No.
But it just seeing their skulls made me think of fossils. Last question, because here's some trivia.
What's my batting average right now? I think I'm doing medium tonight.
You're doing good on this podcast. Okay, you're doing good on this podcast. I asked Pip this, and she guessed somewhat right because I was laughing. I'm like, no way. I'm like, there's no way, because I was laughing. I'm like, you're wrong, just to make sure she would just stick to her guns, and she did. I asked her, and I'm going to ask you, how old do you think the oldest known fossil is in the world?
Okay, I am going to guess 200 million years.
Nope.
Over or under?
Over.
Yeah, I'm over. Okay, I thought that was...
No, under.
Oh, I'm under.
Sorry, other way.
Then 400 million?
Yeah, under. I mean, think about it. Like, we have, like, ancient fossils, from ocean-going creatures.
Oh, like 1 billion?
That's what Pip said, and I laughed. I said, no, there's no way. How do you have a fossil that's 1 billion years old, right? How old's the Earth, roughly?
I think like a couple billion.
Yeah, 4 billion, right? Like 4.4 billion or something. I don't know. We're not Earth scientists. We're out of our lanes right now. But.
Clearly, if this is if somebody just turned this podcast on and then they like somehow skipped like this section, they'd be like, turn it off.
No, we're not dinosaur.
We're just having fun tonight, folks.
Well, we're just talking science. That's what we're
kind of. We're talking about science that we don't really know about. So
science communication. Here we go. This will blow you away. The oldest known fossils that they have found is cyanobacteria from Australia, dates back 3.5 billion years. 3.5 billion years. The Earth's only been around 4.5 billion years.
How is that even possible?
I know. I was like, whoa, how...
I mean, I guess I am trapped of thinking I guess I am in the loop of thinking that a fossil has to be a bone and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But I
exactly.
Guess
this is why I'm bringing it full circle. Mm-hmm. Full circle. This is science. This is why it's so awesome. This is why science is so awesome. 3.5 billion years old. And the oldest known rocks on Earth are only 3.8 billion years old. So in the very, very, very early oceans, you had single cell bacteria or organisms living, and they have actually fossilized. I went in and read a paper. I'm like, okay, Angie's going to ask me how. And I was way out of my lane. It basically, to sum it all up, the paper was early cyanobacteria fossil record, preservation, paleo environment, and identification. And this was published 20 years ago in the European Journal of that whatever field that studies this. And basically, the gist of it was, among the tools are radiometric age determination, analyses of fossil organic compounds and stable isotopes, microbial paleontology, and molecular phylogeny. Molecular phylogeny. So that's the paper that did this. I thought it was fascinating. It just, science is awesome. But basically, the whole reason I brought that up today was when we do talk about evolution and we talk about these fossils being found, there's, we have one now that's 3.8 billion years old, and moving forward, we're able to somewhat chart the evolution of life, right? So that's why I get excited about evolution and thinking of all these crazy things, because the Barbarusa to me looks ancient. It looks like something that survived 20 million years ago, not in 2022.
It does. It really does when you think of a lot of the mammals that went extinct during the last big, what was it, extinction event?
The fifth, that was the dinosaurs. But then we had kind of
what about
the end of the climate change.
And the
They call it. It wasn't a mass extinction, but it was a lot of megafauna went extinct with the end of the ice age and the end of the glacial
I feel like
period.
they should be in there with like giant armadillos and like bear sloths. But they've been around for a while, though. Yeah.
Leading into their evolution, again, it's fascinating. Barbarusa mammals. The order is Artiodactyla, so one of Angie's favorites.
That's right. Even-toed ungulates.
Yeah. And we have 270 land-based even-toed ungulates. So the pigs, the peccaries, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, the hippos, antelope, deer, cattle, goats, sheep. Then, I always ask you this, and then, who belongs to this order that you were like, what?
Dolphins.
Yes, and whales, and 90 species of porpoise and whales and dolphins also are part of Artiodactyla. It's so crazy. Hippos, the closest relative to them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the family is Suidae. So this is the 17 species of pigs. So we'll revisit these again. There's the Visayan warty pig. There's a bunch of warty pigs. The Philippine. They all belong to the genus Sus pigs. That's where the domestic pigs came from. Wild boars. So maybe wild boars would be a good one to do.
Oh, that'd be a fun one, yeah.
Yeah. Sus scruffa. Wild boars. That's where domestic pigs come in. So they had that genus. Then you had the pygmy hogs, great forest hogs, Red River hogs. I know you've mentioned before.
Oh, I'd love to do that. Yes. My friends worked with them at the zoo, and we've been able to go see them behind the scenes at the Animal Kingdom Lodge, and really, really cool scent training stuff that they're doing with operant conditioning.
Nice.
Pigs are just so smart. Yeah,
they are. And then the warthogs, which we covered, episode 145, and then the Babarusas and the 4 species. Now, the 4 species, Angie mentioned a little bit of these. You had the hairy or the golden Barbarusa. The proposed species is Bola Batu Barbarusa. Then the one that Angie said, the Sulawesi Barbarusa. So the North Sulawesi one, and then the Togian Barbarusa. So those are the 4 species of them. And then just quickly, their evolution. Distant relative emerged about 35 million years ago. This was interesting because I didn't think about it, but I would have thought peccaries were a pig species, but they're not.
Me too. Okay.
Yeah, they're not. So there's another one we can add to our list. They're not part of the family. But that's when the peccaries they're pig-like, but that's when they branched out 35 million years ago. So very successful group of mammals, colonized Africa, Eurasia, did not radiate out into the Americas. That's where the peccaries and those other species live. So we'll cover them at some point. Now, Barbarusa's not a lot's known. There just isn't. Again, you could imagine, because finding fossils in this region of the world is probably rare if you can find anything. They do find skeletons and stuff of them, but tracing their evolutionary history to this group of islands has been pretty tough. But what we do know, or what we seem to know, is about 14 million years ago is when Barbarusas branched out on their own. And then the other pig species, like the wild boars and all of them, took really another 10 million years till you really started to see them break out. So like all the sus ones, the Visalia-Warty pigs, the wild boars, they didn't emerge till about 3 or 4 million years ago. So Barbarousa in this family is the oldest species. Now, my favorite fun fact that I found this whole podcast, even though we've got a lot of amazing stuff to talk about still, and this one, I'm just going to go and say it. The oldest known painting by a human, Angie, dates back 35,000 years. Can you guess what it's a painting of?
A Barbarousa.
Yes, a Barbarousa. That's why I brought it up.
That's so cool.
35,000 years ago, they found this painting in a cave of a Barbarousa.
Where? What cave?
It was found in Sulawesi, Indonesia. So we got to go there. That just sounds like a cool place to visit. So that's where the Barbarousa, the oldest human painting, is of this pig.
Fun.
So there you go. Moving on, Ange. Just a couple facts before we get to tusks. I did read, on average 10 to 12 years in the wild, but they can live up to 24 years under human care.
Yeah, or 24, I read.
Yeah.
So a while under human care.
Yeah. And they just, I know a lot of their behavior would be fun to talk about. Very intelligent, very much like other pigs. But these tusks is just where it's at, right?
Chris, these tusks are incredible. They're the things that myths and legends are made out of, literally. So much enchantment and even folklore about them. And there's several thoughts that have been lurking around. And even my husband, John, was potentially spreading false rumors when he said, he's like, oh, I've heard that those tusks can grow into their head, because it should be noted that the tusks do continuously grow.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're usually worn down from rooting around and doing some of these plowing behaviors into the mud, which we'll talk about, or rubbing their face against trees and things like that. So it's not, it's not a big issue, but I had to look into it. Like, is this actually possible? Mm-hmm. Another popular story, but definitely not true, is that a Barbarousa will use its tusks to hang from a tree to wait until a female Barbarousa comes trotting by. They do not do that.
That's so crazy.
They're 200 pounds. And also, we'll talk a little bit about their tusks. The actual anatomy of their tusks is that they're brittle. They're not as strong as like an ivory elephant tusk or something you might think of. And so they're not even really used for anything that takes strength. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, that leads into the fact that, are these tusks used for fighting? With males during male-to-male combat to score a female, or during territory disputes. And so researchers kind of looked into that. Other thoughts were that these tusks were used to help make their nests. We'll learn in behavior that they're very cute. They like to make nests at nighttime, or a female will make a really lovely nest before she has her piglets. So what is going on? Why do they have them? Is it for offense and defense? What research has shown is that, number one, it's totally a mystery. So that's the cliff notes.
There you go.
But there was a hypothesis that perhaps it was used for defense, like for males to fight each other, defend territory, score a female. But it's just not really reasonable for two reasons. Is because when male Barbarousas are kind of battling each other, they don't hook tusks. In fact, the tusks don't really touch that often. They actually stand up and box, which we'll have to put some photos on our show notes.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, they're on their hind legs, and their forelimbs are kind of wrapped around each other, and they're just pushing on each other. And so it doesn't really have too much to do with their tusks, like when you think of perhaps another animal that would use their tusks in a battle. So, and the other thing is that these tusks are a little bit brittle, and they're not made as hard as like a walrus tusks per se. Mm-hmm. And so they really can't withstand like major blows. That's not what they evolved to do, like a lot of other male species that have tusks. So they can't really withstand much pressure. They don't really use them in battle because if they did, they would actually break. So what's going on here? And so the hypothesis that researchers have thrown out there about Barbarossa tusks and why they evolved the way they did is somewhat twofold at this point. They think that the way the tusks curve kind of over into their face might actually protect their face and eyes during a battle with another male. But, that's a really hard one to prove. The other one is it might be for sexual display. Like think of male peacock feathers just got bigger and brighter and bolder with no apparent function, except for that females like the bigger, bolder colored male peacocks with those feathers. And so it might be something like that as far as these big tusks signify genetic fitness to the females as far as who she should want to breed with. So they don't really know. It's still a mystery. And to kind of go back full circle to the original myth that I said John and I were talking about, as do these tusks actually grow into their forehead? And for the most part, the answer is no. There was a researcher, a zoologist out there that went and looked at something like 250 skulls that he could find in all the different museums everywhere. And there was 1 or 2 cases of it happening. And so he surmised that it's very rare. It's not something that would normally ever happen. And so it's not necessarily a problem for Barbaroussas in general, just because they do wear them down. It's not very likely to happen, but it has been documented at least once or twice that we know of.
Yeah. I saw one of the photos of one that had grown.
Yeah. So John was half right. I'll have to give him a point for that. Yeah.
Partial credit. Yeah. Well, and I mean, like the warthog, they use those in defense, right? If I remember right. I mean, it's been so many episodes ago. So they're more, what I'm trying to get at is there's really no functional purpose of the tusks that we know of currently, right?
No. But it is fascinating. I mean, like I said, the Barbaroussa tusk does grow throughout their entire life. And so to be noted that the skull where that did happen, and they think it was a really old male.
Yeah. Because
it's only if they live really, really long that would even be possible. But there's also a blood supply to the tusk of the Barbaroussa, which is a lot similar to our fingernails or our hair. So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. It is. They are one of the most unique looking land mammals. Again, archaic.
Well, and Chris, I do have to point out that there is the record for the Sulawesi Barbaroussa to have a tusk that reached 17 inches.
Dang.
That's a lot.
They're radical.
Usually it's about 8, maybe 12. Yeah, pretty fascinating.
Yeah, they are. All right, before we run off to behavior, because there's it's that boxing stuff. So cool. What we do know that like other pig species, omnivores eat almost anything, they eat berries and leaves and insects and
fish, mushrooms, nuts, berries, even smaller
Barbaroussas. I'm like, but they don't root around, right? They don't root around a lot like other pigs.
This is where they differ from our domestic pigs or some of the other species of pigs. Is they do. I mean, they will eat insects, obviously, and so they do in tubers and stuff. But it's not the roots of trees and tubers and things like that are not a huge part of their diet, and so the rooting behavior is less. And the other thing too is they don't use their snouts to root around as much. They actually use their hooves as more of a digging behavior to get the insects and larvae up off the ground. Yeah.
And I thought a couple of the fun things is they can get on their 2 back feet to reach leaves higher up in the trees, kind of like deer. I guess some
sure,
deer species.
or the gearnook, another
gearnook. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought of. Exactly, it's where my head went.
That's a fun one. Yeah, we'll have to cover that soon.
Yeah, and then talking about because remember they split off 15 million years ago. Their stomachs are different than other pigs.
Yes. The nutrition dork in me, and of course in you as well, is always, okay, monogastric, horses, humans, pigs. We can always make those talking points when we're trying to like get grants across. But yes, the Barbaroussa is not a monogastric.
Meaning
But they're
one
not
stomach.
really they're not really a true ruminant species either with the 4-chamber stomach. It's more of like a 2-chamber stomach.
Yeah. And they thought they might have been ruminants, but they don't know. There's no evidence yet that they do ruminate any of that food. So I think there's still, obviously research is limited with only 5,000 pigs of them left on Earth. So, what is the purpose of that 2-chambered stomach? I don't think we know.
Oh, all you budding nutritionists out there. That's a fun one. That'd be a great one to study.
Yep.
Well, Chris, another cool fact I found out about Barbaroussa nutrition is they have been known to crack hard nuts. So they're capable of adding that to their diet as well. But then this leads to this question about coconuts. Because of where the Barbaroussas live on these islands, the Barbaroussas will sometimes come in contact to like basically commercial coconut farms. And so they can be considered like a nuisance with the farmers. And what I do love about science is some awesome researchers just recently reported in the Japanese Journal of Zoo Wildlife Medicine in 2020 that they actually wanted to look at this and see are they really a nuisance? Can they even really eat coconuts or important parts of young coconuts like the seedlings or the leaflets and other parts that would be bad if they ate that because that's how they're replanting and growing and stuff like that. And so the researchers looked at Barbaroussas under human care and then also Barbaroussas out in the wild to see which pieces of coconut that they are able to eat. Can they eat the whole darn thing? And what they found out is no, that basically the only parts of coconuts eaten by Barbaroussa in the experiment was little broken kernels of the shell and other pieces that were scattered about. And so the pieces that the Barbaroussa did forage on has zero economic value for a farmer.
Right.
And so therefore, the Barbaroussa shouldn't really be seen as a pest or anything that the farmers need to quote unquote get rid of or out of their plantations or have this conflict with. So I just really appreciated looking at this scientifically to see if this is the case. Because yes, I know here, even in Florida where I live, we have wild pigs that are domesticated, but they now live in the wild and they do great. And they really can do a lot of damage to crops and pastures and stuff like that because they do a lot of digging and eat a lot of tubers and tree roots and shoots and stuff like that. But this is not the case at all with the Barbaroussa. And so, yeah, I really appreciate this study. And I like that people are out there doing the hard work to help prove their innocence.
Well, science, when you said the research project showed that they don't. So that's why, again, why we're such big proponents on funding research, conservation research, because now you can go and tell those farmers, well, they're not destroying your livelihood, right? So don't poach them or don't drive, don't kill them, right? Protect them. Yep. That's good stuff. I couldn't find anything on predators. I mean, they said most of these islands are pretty much predator proof, right?
They're definitely predator proof for the Barbaroussa, except for humans and human conflict. And we'll talk about in reproduction, their generation interval. It's kind of slow. They don't produce a lot of piglets per litter each year. So they're not going to rebound the way that, for instance, the wild pigs have in Florida. They really are struggling. And so we need to keep a close eye on them.
Yep. All right. Well, behavior. What are some fun things? I mean, pigs are always fun. Now that's a species I would argue you want to do research on with behavior because it's so fascinating. They're so busy.
Pigs are so fun. And even when we were at Disney this past weekend, I just could have watched the Barbaroussa just do his thing around his big exhibit all day because they're just pretty active. Now, when it comes to Barbaroussas in the wild, they're very shy and they do dwell on the forest or the edge of the forest. And so we actually don't know a ton about their daily habits. In fact, I was reading about this one researcher who studied them 20 or 30 years ago from Oxford, and hearing how they had to travel and how long it took for them to actually find wild Barbarossa, and how remote it was. And then when they did find them, that like one little noise, the Barbarossas would just go running. So in the wild, there's still a lot we don't know. Barbarossas do well under human care for the most part. And so a lot of what we know is from them living in zoos. But what appears to be congruent in both the wild and in zoos is that they're probably mostly diurnal. So they're active during the day and they sleep at night. And they're going to spend a lot of their day roaming around and foraging through the forests and looking for anything and everything to eat, as Chris mentioned, from fish to plants, to nuts, to berries, to insects, to larvae, to other Barbarossas.
So we can skip that one.
But when they're not foraging, they're going to probably be found resting, lying in the mud. That's probably why they want to be on the banks of rivers to beat the heat of the day, right? To cool off. And they'll just kind of lay around and rest. They're great runners. They've got those deer-like legs. They can't run that fast, but they definitely are good runners. And they're even amazing swimmers. Now we know that normal domestic pigs can swim, but I found a video of a Barbarossa swimming at White Oak, the conservation center here in Florida, where I get to help participate in some animal behavior stuff. But there's a video and it's so awesome. I'll have to send it to you. This Barbarossa, the keeper's calling the Barbarossa across this river that's running through their big, amazing field that they're in, because they basically like live in the woods there with all the tens of thousands of acres that they have. Anyways, the pig comes across this river. It's probably about, 20 feet maybe across. And it swims underwater. Like it dives down. Wow. And then you don't see it till it's across the river. And then it pops up and comes out of the river.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
So it was like a mermaid, I'm like, what are we doing here? But it makes sense because I don't know if evolution, they think that some of the different species or subspecies got to the different islands potentially by swimming, right?
Yeah,
Maybe.
Yeah.
So they're definitely great swimmers, and it was really fun to watch that. And so I guess they can even like catch fish while they're swimming. I don't know, but their Barbarossas are incredible.
Yeah.
And then similar to you and I, they do like to be comfortable when they sleep. And so they'll usually make a nest when they as they go to bed for the evening. And they'll use all sorts of leaf litter, grasses, straw if they're under human care, dried grasses to make this nice nest to help them be comfortable in the evening, which I love that. And so, of course, me being the dork that I am, I found this like whole paper that was recently studied in 2019, once again, about nest building behavior of Barbarossas. And so the researchers were trying to answer this question of, we know they build nests, but what do they build it out of? How often do they rebuild it? Do males and females build similarly sized nests? And what the results showed is that both males and females do build nests, and that a young Barbarossa will start helping build nests by the time they're about 15 weeks old. If my kids are listening,
yeah, right.
You are more than 15 weeks old, so you could help prepare your room for bedtime. Make your gosh darn bed, right?
It's the same everywhere.
I know, right? My goodness. And so the Barbarossa do have specific nesting sites that they like. And of course, this was under human care, but they gave them all different types of material to construct nests out of. And they preferred plant materials when available, but they would use even sticks and other things. And so the researchers were basically encouraging zookeepers to take care of Barbarossas, to give them lots of different materials as enrichment that they can build their nests with. And if there is a large group of them, like females that are cooperative, that sometimes they'll build a nest together, which is super cute and charming. So yeah, it's a really important behavior for them, and they like their sleep and they like to be comfortable. And another reason why I love Barbarossa.
Yeah, yeah. It's just they're fun. They're fun. They're a lot of fun. And just thinking about watching them and studying them. So, what do we know about like their social interactions and sociality?
Sure, Chris. Well, once again, it's hard to study them in the wild. The researcher that made a huge push towards saving the Barbarossa 20, 30 years ago and helping work with the Indonesians to put in national parks and preserves for the Barbarossa and Sulawesi was able to observe groups of Barbarossas together as salt licks. And they identified anywhere from 20 to 40, sometimes up to 80 individuals. But they were typically all females, and usually, if anything, just like juvenile males. So what the thought is that males are typically solitary or might live in bachelor herds of 2 or 3, while females can be found in groups, usually anywhere from 5 to 10 with young. But depending on the seasonality, they will come together in these big, large communal groups in the rainforest to wallow and utilize natural salt licks. So the salt brings them all together,
Yes.
makes them super happy.
And gossip.
And so, yeah, and of course, males and females will be seen interacting during breeding season, but typically males are going to be solitary.
Yeah. Got me thinking why they meet and the gossip. Like I was joking, they're gossiping, but that was making me think like, what are some of their vocalizations? I mean, how do they communicate?
Yeah, I mean, like other pigs, they are quite vocal. They do have lots of things to say. They'll moan and grunt is similar to like the oink, right? That we teach our little kids noise. And they also do this really cool behavior that when they're excited, they clatter their teeth. So I need to get a hold of some of my zookeeper friends that have worked with Barbarossas and be like, send me videos of their teeth clattering. I just love that because there's lots of reports of Barbarossas basically showing excitement and enthusiasm and even greeting familiar people in their lives. They may wag their tails, they shake their heads and jump awesome. And run about. I mean, yeah, really like personal behaviors. And then you have this teeth clattering thing, which is just super darling. So I need to find some videos of those and post those on social media because that would just make my heart so happy to see that. I love that. And I got to work with domestic pigs, and they don't do as much like running and jumping because they're domestic pigs. So they're very large in size. But the mama pigs that I worked with were very personable, liked being around us and enjoyed their enrichment, and were super smart for sure. I mean, I really enjoyed them. And I think prepping for this podcast, looking into pig intelligence and cognition on a little bit more of a scientific note, which is one of my favorite areas of expertise, more on horses and other equids. But man, I mean, pigs are super smart, right?
They are.
Some say they're the 5th most intelligent animal in the world. There's talk out there and cognitive studies that they're more intelligent than our dogs, which we all know. We just keep learning more and more and more about how intelligent dogs are. So yeah, pigs they have excellent memory. They excel in like cognitive based game playing things. So once again, that's a different pod for a different day. I really think that we should focus on that, just animal intelligence in general. But I think that pigs are often underrated or not as well studied. And I think sometimes pig intelligence is not always talked about or celebrated as much, maybe because they are a source of protein, of course, for many Americans and people in other countries. But it is something we should really dive deeper into. But there's been other studies of young contagiousness in species such as, of course, humans, but chimpanzees and some of the higher primates, gorillas, bonobos. And then in non-primate species, it's been observed and studied in animals that have a lot of social cohesion. So wolves, for example, some groups of elephant seals, and then it's been found in one species of bird called the budgerier. I'm saying that wrong. Budgerer. It's like a little cute Australian parakeet, super gregarious, and it's green with like a yellow head. So those species it's been recorded in, but researchers took it upon themselves to look at it in domestic pigs and found that it is present. And the researchers suggest that the fact that the pig can see the other pig yawn and then they're more likely to yawn is a sign of really hierarchical social and emotional communication or cognition. And so for me personally, it just makes me relate even more with pigs and want to understand more of what they're thinking and how they think and how they perceive the world, and that they are really thinking, feeling, social, highly social, complex social, emotional creatures with a lot of cognitive abilities that we're still learning about. So yeah, really, really cool.
That's always fun. The behavior, and I know the animal behavior is in you is just like, oh, you wish you could do. You need more hours in the day, right? We need more hours in the day to study this stuff and
Oh
to
yeah,
learn.
it's just giving them a voice, and it's just so eye opening. So I know that they're smart or they have this cognition, but it's awesome when you can really see researchers quantify it and give them the limelight that they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Now, one thing you talk about reproduction and maintaining these populations, what do we know?
Well, there's definitely a few reports of some of their interesting and unique behaviors when it comes to reproduction. Barbarousas do this really cool behavior called plowing. And what the male Barbarousa does during this plowing behavior is if they have soft sand or dirt, they kneel down and then they push their heads in a forward direction, kind of like a plow, if you will, and they create this really deep furrow. And when they're plowing, they're growling and snorting and producing a ton of saliva. And the saliva is like really extra foamy. And so males will do this even more vigorously if they are in another enclosure with another male. So it's thought that this plowing behavior is some sort of scent marking, territorial function, but we don't really know. It is unique. It's not something seen in domestic pigs, and it hasn't been, to my knowledge, I don't know if it's been seen in the wild. It probably has, but more so studied under human care. And they just think with this large amount of saliva that they're probably leaving some type of scent trail behind. And the thought is the scent trail is then communicating to the other male whatever it needs to communicate. Either this is my territory or this is my female. So yeah, still a lot of unknowns with Barbarousa and their reproductive and courtship behavior. But what we do know is Barbarousas typically breed from January to August, depending on which island there are and which species they are. And before they breed, there's typically fights between rival males. And one researcher describes the male breeding behaviors as roving dominance hierarchy. So they're going to basically move around and try to be the dominant pig and breed with whatever females that they can that are in heat. And when they are fighting with other males, once again, they don't really use their tusks, but instead they engage more in this like boxing behavior a lot of times, where they rear up on their hind legs and they face one another and they just lean and paddle their forefeet. I just had a vision of my two little boys, like when they're like pushing at, like with their hands, like pushing at each other, but not, they're not really old enough to actually box or do any damage yet. Give them some years. But anyways, I'm gonna start calling them Babarousas. But but yeah, but they're doing this and they're stretching their heads up to. We'll have to see if we can find some videos. I saw some still shots.
Yeah, I did too.
Put those on our show notes. But yeah, so they'll do this boxing behavior, and the more dominant pig will be the one that can breed the female. And what the research has shown in females that we do know for Barbarousas is that their estrous cycle length can be anywhere between 28 and 42 days. Once again, probably depending on what species they are and where they live or if they're under human care. but the actual estrus, or accepting the males to breed them, will only last for a couple days. And so if you are in the wild forests and, jungles of Indonesia, you got to make sure you can find each other, right? So it seems like a short window to just be an estrus. When a female does become pregnant, her gestation period is going to be about 150 to 157 days. And here's the real kicker. And I don't really remember where warthogs and or like the warty pigs fall, but the female Barbarousa is only going to have 1 to 2 young or piglets per birth.
That's
Where
slow.
if you think, think of
That's
you think of a domestic pig, it can be like 12, 16,
Yeah, a lot. Yeah,
even
yeah.
10. 10 is normal. So completely different. 1 to 2 per breeding season per year. So, that's just really a low number, especially for a pig. And the piglets can weigh anywhere from 400 to 1,000 grams at birth. And they're definitely more precocial, which means they're advanced, right? They're ready to rock and roll right when they're born. But they're born more precocial than other pig family members are. And so they're ready to eat solid foods after 3 to 10 days. They probably start leaving the nest at about 10 days, but they stick with mom, and they're not going to actually be weaned until about 6 to 8 months. So it's a pretty big parental investment if you think about the amount of time that the female is lactating and producing milk for them. So when we talk about conservation and helping these populations grow that are either threatened or endangered, as with the Toygan species of Barbarousa, it's going to take some time, and it's not going to be easy to repopulate them.
No. You see the numbers anywhere from 5 to 10,000. IUCN has them at 5,000. I've seen up to 10,000 left in the wild, but their numbers are decreasing. So that's part of the world being developed, deforestation, all of it.
Well, yeah, Chris, and they're decreasing, even though Indonesia is doing a pretty great job of conserving them. And Sulawesi has large protected areas that these conservationists have fought really hard to help get into place. And it's not legal to hunt them. In one of the articles I was reading, researchers were saying that a solution is probably to make more habitat corridors. So they have these reserves on the islands, but they're not connected. So it's going to be a little tough to make these corridors because there's a lot of people that live in the areas, and so it take a lot of coordination for the people that live around the reserves. But it is something that probably is going to need to be done or at least looked at to help some of the populations rebound.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because Indonesia is doing a lot, and it's like when we were talking about the Sumatran rhino a few podcasts ago. Some of these other species we're talking about, these governments in this part of the world are taking action. It's not, Europe coming in saying, "Oh, do this, do that." It is, like we always say, conservation is local, right? It's always local, but it does take a village. And so this week's group that I wanted to highlight is Action Indonesia. What it is it's a conglomerate of conservation and organizations and zoos from around the world helping to save Barbarousas and other species in this area that we're talking about. So just really quickly, like their mission is, or who they are, is we are the Action Indonesia Global Species Management Plan. So, it's more than 50 organizations across Europe, Asia, Indonesia, America, and Canada, all working together to save some of Indonesia's unique species. So they are working on saving the Barbarousa. the Anoa, and the Banteng. I think these are some other ones you wanted to talk about, right?
Yes. I don't know if you just saw my face light up on the camera.
Yeah.
The Anoa, the midget buffalo. Yes, please. Oh my gosh. I've been dying.
All right. We will get to him. We will get to him soon. I'll have to add that to the list. But there are a group coming together. And actually coming up in August 14th of this year is Action Indonesia Day. So they're going to be raising an awareness on these 3 species and shining a light on them and talk about conservation. So they are on the ground. They are working with locals. They are working with the governments to save these animals, and the Barbarusa specifically. They are helping to do not only cooperative breeding, breeding in zoos, but looking at rescue, rehabilitation, and release. So something that we talked about last week, Angie, was you were talking about reintroduction science.
Yes.
So all of these experts around the world are coming together to work and save these species. So it's just when you find this stuff, and I love highlighting these groups because there are a bunch of people out there working hard to save all of these animals that we're talking about.
Let's send them some money. This is awesome. Share this podcast with your friends. The more listens we get, the more Patreons we get, just the more we help educate our village and get them excited about Barbarusas, about the Indonesian wildlife. The more we can help donate money to the people that are out there, boots on the ground, doing a great job.
Yep. And you can find them on the website at Action Indonesia GSMP.org, and always on our website or in our show notes, you can find links to these organizations. So again, that's Action Indonesia GSMP.org. You can follow them. It's a beautiful website. They talk about everything they're doing, all of their projects on the ground, and how they are helping the people of Indonesia save these animals. So tip my hat to you. Yeah.
And they're also on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
So
check them out. And just final tip, conservation tip of the week: go to a museum, show your children fossils, talk about science, talk about fossils, talk about these animals. Get your young ones enthralled with science. Again, the green generation. I think Xander's the one that called him that a couple of years ago in a podcast. He said, "Oh, we're the green generation." But with them up and coming, getting them excited, I love to see it in my own boys. Even when we go out and birding or we're walking, I'm like, "Oh, what bird is that?" And it's Waka Waka or New Zealand fantail. Or get your kids in museums, get them outside, looking at wildlife, because they're our future. But thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, everyone.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.